Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for our program on Unearthing Potential, the value of geothermal energy to U.S. decarbonization. We are so excited to have you all call in from all over the world. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the Senior Director and Richard Morningstar Chair for Global Energy Security here at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. We are here today to assess the state of geothermal energy in the United States. Geothermal promises to help solve several central challenges of the energy transition. It can produce zero carbon, always on power. It can heat and cool buildings cleanly and efficiently. It can create process heat for a host of secondary applications. And in certain circumstances, it can support the extraction of key minerals. But adoption has been relatively minimal, with geothermal producing only 0.4% of all US utility scale electricity generation. And development has largely been restricted to the Western US. And though innovators in the field, some of whom you'll hear from today, have made exciting and novel breakthroughs in extraction, integration, and deployment, state and federal policy has mostly failed to keep pace. For geothermal energy to take its place in the energy mix of the future, that will have to change. So we are so fortunate to have with us today several experts and leaders in the geothermal space who will be evaluating the status quo and discussing paths forward in a conversation over the next hour. Our event today is also accompanied by the launch of a report of the same name written by Zach Strauss, a policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy and a non-resident fellow at the Global Energy Center. I want to congratulate Zach on writing such a thoughtful, thorough, and actionable look at the prospects for U.S. geothermal going forward. We'll be putting a link to the report in the chat for all of you to check out on your own time. And I just want to add that I think this is another great example of some of the work that the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center is doing on the suite of technologies that we will need if we want to have a net zero future. So the geothermal, hydrogen, carbon capture, a whole range of technologies where we will need to advance these technologies if we're going to meet our goals. Some of them may not work out, but we need to explore all of these technological options if we're going to be successful. So before we jump in, I have a few reminders for our audience. First, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and use the hashtag AC Energy. We are on the record and currently live streaming on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We encourage you to share and post about what you hear today. And those in the virtual audience can submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. If you're watching on another platform like YouTube, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Zach Strauss, the author of the report and our moderator for today, to get the discussion started. Zach, over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, Randy, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all here today. As he mentioned, my name is Zachary Strauss. I'm a policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy, a public policy consulting firm at the cross-section of transportation and building electrification, as well as a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to moderate this panel of geothermal superstars today and to launch this report focused on the multifaceted opportunities for geothermal to support economy-wide decarbonization here in the United States. With applications in the power, efficient heating and cooling, sustainable minerals, agriculture, tourism, and industrial sectors, geothermal is able to support U.S. climate action in ways most other energy sources cannot. Now let's kick things off by introducing our panelists today. We are joined this morning by Dr. Susan Ham, Director of the Geothermal Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy, Kathy Hannon, President and co-founder of Dandelion Energy, Sarah Jewett, Director of Strategy at Fervo Energy, Professor Teresa Eileen Jordan, J. Preston Levis Professor of Engineering at Cornell University, and last but not least, Jack Kiruja, Associate Program Officer for Geothermal Energy at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And as a reminder to our audience, as Randy mentioned, we encourage you to submit your questions today through Q&A portal at the bottom of your Zoom screen throughout the event, and I'll get to as many of them as I can over the course of the hour. As an important note, as he said before, only those engaging directly through Zoom will be able to submit their questions. Now, with all of that, let's dive right in. I'd like to start with Sue. It's really great to have you here today with us To start things off with the big picture, I wanted to ask you how you and the GOE view geothermal's place in the future of the energy mix in the US. What role is geothermal especially well suited to play in a decarbonized US economy?
Zach, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really glad you asked that question, right? Geothermal is 100% poised to take a leading role in the decarbonized economy. Geothermal energy is readily available. It's a clean resource that can support the nation's energy needs in so many ways, right? From baseload power for the utility grid to district heating that services communities and campuses effectively. At GTO, at the Geothermal Technologies Office, which is part of the US Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, our main focus is to boost geothermal deployment overall, which is on the pathway to the Biden administration's goals for clean energy and a net zero economy by 2050. Our goal is to supply at least 60 gigawatts of total US electricity generation by 2050, which is enough to power 129 million American homes and businesses. We also have strategic objectives to decarbonize building, heating, and cooling loads through geothermal district heating systems and heat pumps. If we can realize our combined electric and non-electric sector geothermal deployment targets, the emissions reductions will be the equivalent of taking 26 million cars off US roads annually by 2050. And just one more thing, in terms of local economic development, geothermal offers opportunities across the country. With advanced technology, we can capture geothermal energy in all 50 states. First, that means local communities will have more options for energy, such as retrofitting buildings with geothermal heating and cooling or implementing district heating systems. In addition, geothermal energy offers a small physical footprint and a wide range of applications, which makes it viable for use in urban centers, rural areas, and remote communities. And expanding geothermal deployment can help grow the domestic supply chain and create jobs nationwide.
Thank you so much for that overview. Really appreciate it. I love how GTO is sort of on that leading edge and providing us with the information we need to make these policies. Everyone's checked it out. The GeoVision report by GTO was released a few years ago, and it sort of lays out that roadmap that she was mentioning. So check it out. I'd like to now pass to Sarah. Fervo Energy is right on the leading edge of geothermal energy innovation in the United States. I wanted to pose the same question to you. What role does geothermal energy have to play going forward? And what are some of the primary obstacles, whether political, technological, or economic, the sector faces in its effort to produce electricity at scale?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Zach. And thanks for having me. It's really cool to be on a panel with such really awesome panelists with an organization like Atlantic Council. So Fervo Energy is a utility scale geothermal energy developer. And so when I'm talking, I'm really representing that part of the sector. You know, I think a lot of people think today that geothermal energy is a really niche industry, and they often think, oh, well, you know, geothermal's never really played a large role in the US electricity mix, so why are we so interested in it today? And I think that niche role, you know, is not wrong. I think today when a large load serving entity, utility, or a community choice aggregator thinks about procuring renewable energy for their grids, they basically try to go look at the market and evaluate contracts on a levelized cost of electricity basis. And from that standpoint, I think geothermal has a higher levelized cost of electricity than other alternatives like wind and solar. And so geothermal really does compete on attributes like a high capacity factor, ability to provide round the clock clean power rather than variable renewable energy. And so, you know, today it's really competing on attributes rather than on cost. But I think what we're looking at from an industry perspective in the future is as widespread deployment occurs and as geothermal energy starts to really come down the cost curve, it will become much more of a household name in terms of the renewable energy landscape. And I just think it will provide a much greater percentage of utility scale power in general. Now, there are other things that become unlocked as geothermal deployment goes up. You know, one of the things that's really interesting is that ORMAT has proven that we can operate geothermal power plants flexibly. through, bypass cutting off their ability to produce electricity. And I think there are a bunch of companies working on various types of flexible geothermal energy that can make it more of a, peaking or long duration energy storage type of resource. So that's one really interesting thing. And then there are a bunch of other interesting things that happen when this firm clean power resource becomes widely deployed. Green hydrogen needs a source of firm clean power. Direct air capture needs a source of firm clean power, and heat. Lithium extraction can benefit from geothermal brine extraction as well. And so I think what will happen is geothermal will become a very regular source for all of those different varied energy sources in the US. So I think, geothermal niche no longer. This is really an interesting time in the market for geothermal energy. And I think we're really grasping at that moment.
Love that. Niche no longer. I would agree with you. I think it's gaining a lot of traction in the media, and I think people are starting to pay attention, especially on the minerals piece and on the buildings piece. Thank you so much for that first answer. Looking forward to coming back to you. As a heat pump nerd myself, I'd love to now turn to Kathy. So Kathy, nearly 15% of US greenhouse gas emissions are attributed to the building sector, both commercial and residential, with a significant portion of that stemming from space heating, water heating, and cooling. Can you give us a sense of the impact geothermal heat pumps or ground source heat pumps could have on this particular piece of the emissions pie? Where and how could geothermal heat pumps be most effectively deployed?
Thanks, Zach. Well, I'll start by saying that, as you would imagine, a lot of the emissions from heating in buildings will come from parts of the country that do a lot of heating. So by definition, places that tend to be cold. And when you think about what we're going to have to do across the board to decarbonize buildings and heating specifically, we're really going to have to depend on heat pumps. There really is no other way that's scalable anyway. So we have air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps. And they both will play a really important role. But the reason that I think geothermal heat pumps are critical in this transition is because when you look at what it will take on our electric grid to decarbonize buildings in cold places, and you compare what would it look like if we transitioned, let's say, the Northeast to air source heat pumps versus to ground source heat pumps. Even if you weatherized all the buildings in the Northeast, which obviously we won't be able to do that, but let's say you did, and then you put air source heat pumps in them, the electricity needed to do that is still greater than just moving all the buildings to ground source heat pumps. And in fact, if we only depend on air source heat pumps, we're going to have to more than double the capacity of our electrical grid just to be able to supply the amount of power you'll need to heat all those buildings when it's cold. So the role that geothermal will play is making it practical, and it's kind of ironic because I think one of the things our industry has suffered from is a reputation of being impractical, at least on the geothermal heat pump side. But I think really when you extrapolate what it will take as a system to decarbonize all these buildings, I just don't really see a world where we can more than double the size of our electricity generation just for buildings when we also have to decarbonize transportation and we also want to decarbonize industrial processes. So yeah, geothermal heat pumps give us a path to decarbonize buildings without straining the electrical grid nearly as much. And then they're also the lowest total cost of ownership option for homeowners in places where it's cold. So they play those two very important roles.
Thank you so much. And just if you could, in about 30 seconds or a minute, explain to our audience who may not have any understanding of what this technology is, what is a geothermal heat pump and how does it work?
I should have started with that. So thank you for prompting me. A geothermal heat pump is, okay, well, let's start with a heat pump. A heat pump is an appliance that moves heat from one place to another. So that sounds more exotic than it is. An air conditioner is a heat pump that moves heat from the inside of your house to the outside to cool your house, for example. So imagine an air conditioner that can both heat and cool. So it can bring heat from the outside in, or it can move heat from the inside out. That is an air source heat pump. Now, a ground source heat pump or a geothermal heat pump, those are two words for the same thing. Instead of moving heat between the house and the outside air, they move heat between the house and the ground. And the reason that that's useful is that the ground maintains a pretty steady, approximately 50 degree Fahrenheit temperature year round. And so in the summer, you're moving heat from your house to a cooler place, which is the ground, 50 degrees, which is great because heat loves to go from hot to cold. So you're doing what heat wants. And then in the winter, you get to take heat from a 50 degree temperature source instead of trying to pull it from very, very cold air. And that's the advantage that allows you to run these things with very high efficiency and very high capacity.
Excellent. Thanks so much. We'll come back to thinking about how this applies, particularly in places in the Northeast where they use fuel oil, for example.
That's right.
I'd love to now move to Teresa. Thank you so much for being here today. With much of the US geothermal energy concentrated in the Western United States, particularly in California and Nevada, expanding eastward will be key to nationwide geothermal adoption. What technologies and approaches are most promising in this eastward effort? Deep direct use comes to mind for me. Where should states outside of the Western US look to build out local geothermal energy resources in your experience?
Thank you so much for having me. And I like the flow from ground source heat pumps to deep direct geothermal, because deep direct geothermal essentially is bringing the hot water out of the ground, but rather than converting it to electricity, it's distributing it to some purpose that didn't really need electricity, it needed heat. And so it has many of the advantages that we just heard are true of geothermal heat pumps, yet it's better in the use end of it. This is because the water extracted from deep underground is much higher temperature than what you just heard described as ground source heat pumps. And so there's more calories of energy in it. There's more efficiency of extracting heat to use in our homes and buildings, and lower electricity consumption. And as we were just told, an obvious place where this would be good to do east of the Western US is in the Northeastern United States, where over 30% of the total energy used is used to heat buildings in one type or another of buildings. But we have to acknowledge that there are barriers to harvesting this deep heat from deep underground. And so currently there's a high degree of uncertainty of whether any particular project will be technically feasible. Can we get the heat out the way we planned it? And that there's high investment costs upfront. But the uncertainties diminish if there are some large-scale demonstration projects that we can all study and poke and probe and find out why they were successful and why they're unsuccessful, and you reduce the uncertainty that way. To get more specific about, so where are the best places east of the Western US? There's sort of two parts to that question. One is, where is it going to be most feasible to get heat out of the ground, which is a question of geology and of how the water moves through the rocks. The other part is, where are the users, the consumers who can take this experimental step and become a demonstration. So the Department of Energy has supported researchers to investigate where in northeastern states would be most suitable. And we learned that over large parts of upstate New York, western and central Pennsylvania, West Virginia, that the opportunities to get the heat out are not identical, not uniform completely, but they're relatively uniform. And so there's really broad areas over which the opportunity is moderately good. And frankly, moderately good is what we need for demonstration projects, because if we focus on the narrowly defined perfect conditions, then we increase our cost because we have to spend a lot of money exploring 2 miles underground for where is it perfect. And we just need to be able to do this where it's average if it's going to be widely deployed. So the other part of where to do it is in institutions, communities that have pre-existing surface infrastructure that can use district heating. So universities are one of those cases, but there's communities that have district heating systems as well. And the other sort of category of user that is sort of predisposed to this would be users who are really interested in the resilience of their energy system. And so you might think of military bases, hospital complexes. They're going to put a priority, not cost matters, but on resilience of what they've created.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love that last part talking about national security, resilience, that added value to this system. Interestingly, I learned this not that long ago, but the city of Paris has a very large district heating system. Most people don't know that. Almost the entire Ile-de-France, that big circle of Paris, is heated with the central district heating system, which is quite interesting. So thank you, Teresa. We'll come back to you shortly. And I'd like lastly move to Jack. Thank you so much for joining us here all the way from the UAE. Could you offer our audience an international perspective on geothermal development? What does a mature, innovation-friendly geothermal policy environment look like? What has worked well in other countries, say in Kenya, and maybe what hasn't?
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach, for the question and for also the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. Now, I want to discuss this from the perspective of the energy markets. And I think the markets are very dynamic, and it's very important for the markets to respond to the expectations of the different stakeholders who are taking part in various aspects of either development or utilization of the geothermal resource. And in the geothermal sector, maybe I would, first of all, just want to highlight a few of the stakeholders that would require a good environment for them to be able to operate in. First of all, we need the geothermal investors, the financiers, the project developers, as well as the end users to feel comfortable operating in a geothermal market. And when you look at the geothermal resource, by its very nature, when you're beginning the exploration of the resource, it's very hard to tell what energy content you're going to get from this resource. And because of this nature, it presents a challenge for the developers in the form of geological risks. And of course, these ones, it's always important to have these addressed so that the developers can feel comfortable to get into the into the geothermal development environment. Now, what we've noticed over the years is that the success rate of drilling the exploration wells, and here I'm talking about the first 5 wells or 3 to 5 wells, has been improving over the years. So initially in the 60s, we were talking of success rates of less than 50%, but this has improved to the point where in the 2000s, we are talking of success rates of over 85%. And I'm sure if we look at the more recent data, we find that this has even gone much higher, probably. But unfortunately, despite the fact that the actual risk has been decreasing over time, the perception of risk has still remained to be quite high, and understandably so. So in most markets, what we are seeing is the establishment of risk mitigation facilities in order to be able to cushion the developers from any losses in case their drilling do not turn out to be successful. And we are seeing various types of risk mitigation facilities. For example, in most of the developing countries, these are countries that have young geothermal markets, like in East Africa, in Latin America, and parts of Asia. We are seeing publicly funded risk mitigation facilities coming on board. For example, in the East Africa, we have the Geothermal Risk Mitigation Facility. In Latin America, the Geothermal Development Facility. And in Indonesia, some risk mitigation facilities funded by some multilateral development banks. Now, in the more mature geothermal markets, mostly in Europe, we are seeing risk mitigation facilities that are based on insurance principles. So projects contribute to a risk mitigation kitty, and in case the one of the projects by one of the contributors turn out not to be successful, of course, depending on the criteria of what an unsuccessful project means, then this project owner gets to be compensated a certain percentage of the cost of their project. Recognizing the critical importance of risk mitigation facilities, what we're seeing in Europe, recently they concluded a project called the GeoRisk project, which was being led by the European Geothermal Energy Council in collaboration with some of their partners. And as part of this project, they developed a model that is to be adopted by the member countries to build their own national risk mitigation facilities based on the insurance principles. Now, I just want to touch briefly on the heat. So, heating sector is a very important sector that also needs a very good environment for it to be able to contribute effectively to the decarbonization. And so far, globally, we are talking of over 50% of the final energy consumption being in form of heat. And if we do not address the question of heating, then we cannot talk about decarbonization and climate action and energy transition in a comprehensive manner. And this is because most of the heating currently is being supplied using fossil fuels. Now, geothermal energy, of course, has the ability to be able to meet the energy, the heating needs of a number of end-use sectors, for example, the building sector and also some industrial applications. And for example, in Europe, they talk about 25% of the European population living in areas where they can be able to access heating from geothermal district heating systems. Now, if you include the heat pumps, then you have a much bigger percentage of people who can be able to have their homes heated using geothermal. But unfortunately, it's not always to do the heat transition. And one of the major challenges with regard to these heating using geothermal, using renewables, is the fact that most of the buildings that exist today, when they were initially constructed, they were not designed for, they were designed for heating using high temperature resources. But when you look at the renewables that are available for heating of buildings, including geothermal, most of these resources are low temperature. And with these are old buildings that do not have very high thermal energy performance, then it becomes difficult to heat them using geothermal. And what we're seeing with a number of countries is that they're providing incentive schemes for renovation to the homeowners, whereby they can be able to get easy financing, in some cases interest-free loans, to be able to do renovations on their building. We're also seeing some guarantee and some grants as well as subsidies that are being provided for the purchase of heat pumps. And in the case of renewable heat suppliers, they are also getting some subsidies to be able to supply renewable heat, including geothermal, into district heating and cooling networks. So this mostly applies whereby the cost of generating renewable heat is more expensive than the heat generated from fossil fuel alternatives. So this difference in prices is usually compensated using these subsidy schemes. Zach, if you give me just a minute, I would also want to talk about.
I might actually pause so that we do have a limited amount of time. We can come back to this point maybe in your second answer, if you mind. Thank you so much. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you.
Particularly interested in learning about the financing mechanisms and the multilateral banks and the insurance mechanisms that these countries are putting in place. I'm actually not familiar if there are any insurance mechanisms here in the US for geothermal, but I'd love to hear if those do exist from our panelists today. Love to now return to Sue. So Sue, in your view, what is holding the US geothermal sector back here in the United States? Is it policy barriers? Is it technology development? Is it the economics? Can you lay out sort of what those policy or economic technology barriers might be, and maybe what some of those solutions are?
Well, given that we are an R&D shop, let me at least start with the technology development, right, which is a big piece of the puzzle. So while geothermal energy already contributes to both electric and non-electric uses in the United States, advancing the technology is key to moving the needle on deployment. We just released last month our brand new multi-year program plan, and that MYPP details our objectives and plans to carry out those types of activities. And I encourage anyone who's interested to visit our website to read this multi-year program plan. We're very proud of it. We did the GeoVision in 2019. This is the follow-on. How are we going to get to what we saw as the opportunities in GeoVision? For example, right, GTO is working to advance enhanced geothermal systems, which use man-made reservoirs to tap geothermal energy. These systems are essential to really unlock nationwide geothermal energy potential for both electricity and heating and cooling. And as we all know, right, one of the challenges for geothermal energy is that it's hard to see, it's hard to measure, and it's just, when it's a subsurface resource, you just can't touch and feel it the same way you can as some of the surface resources. So our work to improve geothermal exploration and characterization is helping address that issue with initiatives like we have a geoflight partnership with the US Geological Survey out of the Department of Interior, where researchers are using specially equipped low-flying aircraft to survey areas such as the Salton Trough area in California. And the data from that project will allow us to identify potential geothermal resources. Then, once we find those resources, we need to be able to get to them cost effectively, right? Everyone knows that drilling is just very expensive. And GTO is really working to drive down the cost of geothermal drilling with initiatives like our currently open funding opportunity on research to speed up drilling times. So those are some of the key ways that technology development is important and how we're addressing them. And before I turn it back to you, Zach, I just want to say another key area that we want to address is non-technical, and that's project development timelines, including the time it takes to permit geothermal projects. The GeoVision analysis found that reducing permitting and regulatory process times alone, even without any technology improvements, which is, we really believe in the technology improvements, but even without that, we can triple the rates of geothermal exploration and resource discovery and cut project development timelines in half. And that's an area of focus for the federal government hopes to address.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know that permitting and regulation piece is definitely one of the bigger hurdles. So hopefully we can dig in a little bit more to that today. Love to jump now to Sarah. I want to ask you a variation of that same question as you come from a different perspective. What are some of the hurdles the geothermal power sector might need government support to overcome? How can the US government best support geothermal innovation, especially as interest moves again eastward and opportunities for value adds like lithium extraction, co-location with solar production, green hydrogen, or fossil fuel infrastructure emerge?
Yeah, I'm really glad that Sue touched on permitting, because that's the thing that gets me going the most. I think geothermal has really been stuck in a little bit of a chicken and egg cycle. It's always been, when I talk to external stakeholders, they say, geothermal is small and it's slow growing and it's sleepy. And that is changing because there's a huge demand for 24/7 carbon-free energy. And there are not that many solutions right now, especially solutions that can be constructed in a reasonable development timeline with low environmental impact. And so I think all of a sudden the geothermal energy industry is seeing massive market demand that we haven't seen in the past. And because we haven't seen that demand, policy support has been, limited. And I think technology innovation has been limited. All of these things have occurred. But now all of a sudden we have huge demand. We are being asked to put forth a huge number of projects. And frankly, there's so much demand that the existing geothermal energy industry can't provide all of the electricity that's being demanded. And so I think there's a lot that the government can help with. I think firstly is permitting. And just to educate people about why that's important is it's a little bit more straightforward to site and do site analysis for, say, a solar project and understand where you're going to put your arrays and where you're going to interconnect and then permit the thing one time. And I think for geothermal energy development, because you're dealing with this subsurface resource, you have to explore where you want to put your wells, which takes some drilling, and then you have to drill your wells, and then you have to construct your power plant, and all of those take different and separate environmental permitting processes. We as an industry believe that we should definitely consider full environmental impact of our projects, but figuring out how to make it so that we're not doing the same environmental assessments over and over again for multiple stages of our projects is definitely a big priority for us, and something that we're trying to get federal government help with, and state level Bureau of Land Management as well. And so that's a big priority. I think because there's so much demand and because the geothermal energy industry has been so small, there are a bunch of companies trying to build really big projects really fast right now. And that takes a massive amount of capital. And so I think one of the things that we've really been pushing for is a little bit of help on the appropriation side. And, that I think is everyone needs more money all the time. And so, take that with a grain of salt. But there have been some really amazing developments. We saw $84 million come from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that will be put forth for large scale geothermal demonstration projects, which is huge for us. And a lot of the work that Sue and her office are doing with figuring out how to effectively use the appropriations that are coming down the pike is really valuable for us. I think another big issue is putting us on a level playing field with other renewable energies from a tax perspective. Geothermal is being asked to compete on a levelized cost of energy perspective, but we do not benefit from the same tax treatment as wind and solar. And so that could be something that is really meaningful for the geothermal energy industry to compete in the future. What has been drafted in the Build Back Better Act is actually perfect for geothermal. And so we are anxiously awaiting whatever tax legislation comes out of the federal government in the near future. And so I think those are sort of the main ones. Transmission planning is always a big question for geothermal energy on a large scale. And as coal plants are retired, how is that transmission capacity being reallocated for other firm clean sources is a big issue for us. But yeah, I think, the second part of your question, Zach, really how the federal government can help with geothermal and all of these other things is, a little bit to not get ahead of ourselves. I think we as geothermal energy developers often feel like, okay, there are all of these other really exciting things that geothermal energy can do. We can do lithium extraction, we can do direct air capture, we can do green hydrogen production, we can do all of this really cool stuff. But in reality, geothermal energy industry still needs help. And once the geothermal energy industry is up and running and deploying effectively, then we can do all of these other things. And so I would just say, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's focus on geothermal energy in priorities. And really, really, really amazing things will happen from a secondary perspective.
Thank you so much for that overview. And in the report, we do go over many of these obstacles and provide some solutions, including legislation and other federal options. So thank you so much for laying those out for our audience today. Really appreciate that. Now going back to Kathy to talk more about the building sector. As we discussed, geothermal applies to a host of different sectors. We'll return to the building sector. So Kathy, one of the barriers to widespread ground source heat pump adoption is the high upfront cost to the customer, again, mostly coming from the drilling. What opportunities are there to reduce costs and increase access to this technology, particularly for low and middle income earners, so that it is really a universally accessible technology? And would these actions be on the federal, the state, or the utility level, or all of the above?
Mm-hmm. One of the really exciting things happening in states like New York right now, who have some of the most forward-looking policies, is that we're, for example, transitioning middle-income customers from fuel oil and propane, these high-cost fuels, to geothermal for no upfront cost. And the monthly cost that these customers pay, it's diminished when they go to geothermal. So it's a cash flow positive switch. And that's very powerful when you can make the switch from a fossil to a renewable resource actually in the customer's economic best interest, of course, right? And so that's really what we need to see happen, not just in the most policy forward states, but in all the states, like not just against fuel oil and propane, but eventually against natural gas as well. And I think that policies on the federal, state, and utility levels, they all play a role. So to echo what Sarah said, we've seen with rooftop solar, third-party ownership, having leases and PPAs, that's been critical to growing that industry and making it more affordable. The tax treatment of geothermal today is not the same as for solar. And so we're not able to offer those lease and PPA products. Build Back Better would have changed that. So we too are hopeful that some of the legislation that was not passed in Build Back Better will find its way to pass on the federal level this year. On the state level, some of the programs that we've seen help with affordability, states offer subsidized loan products. So one of the challenges, geothermal heat pumps, they're not mainstream yet. And so the cost of financing them is higher than it should be, just because the financing market doesn't have enough experience with these products. States can be very helpful with that because by subsidizing those loans to customers, they allow them to finance and have that zero upfront cost and pay on a monthly basis for their system. And again, that allows them to be cash flow positive when they make the switch. And then lastly, utilities have played a leading role actually in helping us make geothermal heat pumps more accessible in the regions where we operate. Utilities recognize what I was saying before, the very beneficial impact of geothermal heat pumps on the grid. And for the utilities that are able to capture that value in the form of an incentive to homeowners, right? To let the homeowner that's making the investment take credit for some of the grid benefits that they're allowing for by adopting, it just makes the systems much more affordable. So we're seeing very, very good incentives in New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut. We're starting to see more and more spread. And I think as that happens, we'll just see the affordability, be much improved compared to where it was historically.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And those 3 states that you mentioned are some of the most highly dependent on fuel oil for heating. So that's something to note, that it is those states that see the highest cost for the residents for heating are really trying to move them to a more electrified future. So
and I think it's like that. It's the states that need to address the decarbonization of buildings in order to have any chance of meeting their greenhouse gas emissions targets, right? Because if 30% of your emissions come from buildings, of course, you're going to need to transition those buildings to heat pumps in order to meet your goals.
Right. As we see in New York City and some of these other big cities, Boston, they have a huge percentage of emissions coming from buildings alone, and they're putting forth these pretty strong policies. So we'll see how these big cities react in the future. So thank you for sharing. I'd like to now move to Teresa. So you work at Cornell. Universities like Cornell University and the University of West Virginia are participating in some exciting geothermal innovation projects for deep direct use and district heating on college campuses. I also know that Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is located, has committed to complete municipal decarbonization across the entire economy in the city. What role can universities play as geothermal development laboratories, and what partners do you engage with in these endeavors? Do you work with different countries, city governments, et cetera?
Well, thank you very much for that question. Universities are well prepared to be the entities that test at scale direct use deep geothermal heat systems. And this is partly historical. Many universities have direct or district heating systems. And so once you have this system, someone mentioned before that many of the systems were built for high temperature heat, but the modifications to lower temperature heat are less extreme than building one, digging up the existing subsurface infrastructure and building a whole new system. So converting an old district heating system to whatever alternative greener source of heat may be available to you is a fairly sensible action that each university with a district energy system might take. But Cornell University is somewhat unusual in that we've had a decades-long habit of a partnership between the infrastructure utility staff of campus with the academic faculty in trying to find for the scale the whole university, develop together systems that make the campus more sustainable. We call this, Cornell is a living lab, the Cornell campus and its facilities. And this gives us, and other universities can do the same thing if they get their act together of these two groups working together. It allows the innovations, the technological research to go from the computer simulations or the laboratory bench scale up to true deployment scale across that valley of death of the investment world. And it's only by having test cases of this at deployment scale of deep direct use district heating systems will the realities of all the challenges actually be confronted. And this involves many things that have been mentioned before. Things like, it's not only the cost of the technology itself, what Department of Energy's enhanced geothermal solutions will be, but also the cost of the regulations, the cost of financing, the cost of insurance and liability, and all these things that actually have to be simultaneously solved for the system to both work locally, but also to be attractive at a commercial scale for deployment. So our partners in doing this, and we've learned vast amounts from utilities operating in cities in other countries. Like Reykjavik, Iceland, of course, has a lot of knowledge of operating district heating systems. And as you mentioned, Zach, the systems in Paris, France are a wonderful example. And among other things, they have shown us the vital role of industrial scale heat pumps in making even a moderate temperature, moderate flow of water, geothermal resource into a system that functions with the old heating systems. So solving partly the problem Jack mentioned. We also have to, Kathy, I think mentioned, or Sarah, that the geothermal industry has its limits of how much it can accomplish now. So we have to partner with the other group that's got experience bringing materials out of the subsurface, and that is the traditional oil and gas operating companies and their service companies. They've got incredible technical experience, know-how, capacity. And so they have to be partners in this. And then because of the high investment costs in the system, we have to partner with everybody involved in the questions of who owns the geothermal heat in the subsurface, who regulates the wells, who will finance it, who will tax it, what are the liabilities. All of those people have to be at the table in partnership. So there's sort of like private, governmental, and corporate partnerships are all needed.
Thank you so much for that great overview. And you did touch on some of our audience questions too regarding oil and gas involvement and engagement in the sector. We hope we'll have time at the end to get to some of those questions. But in the interest of time, I'd like to get to our last question for our panelist, Jack here. Jack, in your work in Kenya and in IRENA, you've been engaged with a wide variety of geothermal projects. So given your experience, how can geothermal be applied to economy-wide decarbonization? And how has it changed? I guess this is a more important part of the question. How has it changed or positively impacted the communities and countries where it's been extensively deployed, particularly in developing economies? And as we do only have about 10 minutes, let's try to keep our answer concise.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, as has been mentioned by panelists over and over again, geothermal is a unique type of resource because not only is it able to give us electricity, but it's also able to give us heat. And we're also seeing the possibility of also extracting mineral elements from geothermal that can be used to support the decarbonization. So first of all, I would like to talk about electricity. And at the moment, we are seeing an installed capacity of about over 15 gigawatts of electricity from geothermal. And this is slightly under 1% of the total installed power capacity globally. Now, studies have shown that geothermal has the potential to provide over 8% of the total electricity generation globally. And of course, when this can be achieved, then geothermal can contribute greatly to the decarbonization of the electricity sector. Now, looking at the heating sector, there are various ways in which geothermal can be utilized in the building sector, in the agri-food sector, as well as for industrial applications. And at the moment, we are talking about 107 gigawatts of geothermal heat already installed. Today I was reading an article from Europe where they are talking that there's a potential for them to have an additional 14 gigawatts of 14 gigawatts of heat installed through district heating systems in the next 5 years, as well as about 40 gigawatts of heat through heat pumps. So, there's a lot of geothermal energy in the next 5 years, and this has a potential of displacing up to 22 billion cubic meters of gas. So, in that sense, we see also a very big contribution in terms of decarbonization of the heating sector. Now, in terms of the benefits that we're seeing for geothermal, I'll first of all start with what some of the panelists have already talked about, the base load characteristic of geothermal. Now, of course, because of its base load characteristic, then we're also seeing and also the possibility of it operating in a flexible manner. It plays a very, very important role in the stabilization of the electric grid. Now, another important thing also is the cost of geothermal. Now, I know the levelized cost is a very key unit that has been used over and over again, but it's also important to look at the avoided cost of geothermal electricity. Of course, this is as a result of it being a base load. So when you have one installed megawatt of geothermal power, it's able to displace maybe 3 or 5 megawatts of the other variable renewables, and these are big saving on the energy systems. Now, when you look at on the side of heating, one of the benefits that we are seeing, particularly with the agri-food applications, is the fact that geothermal is supporting the establishment of sustainable food systems and also contributing to food security. Now, another thing also is that we see in most of the developing countries is the fact that a lot of women and youth are employed in the agricultural sector. And the increased use of geothermal in this sector is really providing employment for these youth and also empowering them as well as the women economically. So these are some of the benefits that we see with regard to the use of geothermal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That last part is really important, that food security, agricultural sustainability. I know in Klamath Falls, Oregon in the US, there is a fish farming site that uses direct heat from geothermal to produce large varieties of tropical fish sustainably. So that has also happened here. So I'd love to learn more about how that's happening across the world as well. Thank you for sharing. Love to now go to some of our audience questions. Love to know, pivot to Sue. How does geothermal impact sort of water resources or the water table, and how would it impact perhaps induced seismicity? And then a second part of this question is, are they looking, or is the GTO or geothermal industry looking to use abandoned oil wells or fracked wells for co-located geothermal production, or to repurpose those resources for geothermal use?
Okay, so I'm going to answer 3 questions in 20 seconds. So the first question has to do with water. So I'm going to point everyone to our GeoVision document, and I'm going to read something from the GeoVision document. Under the GeoVision analysis, technology improvement scenario, which is where you assume that we can get all the technology improvements that we want, geothermal energy could represent 8.5% of total national electricity generation, while being accountable for only 1.1% of power sector water withdrawals. The majority, and so there would be some increase in water, especially the more enhanced geothermal systems that you use, the more water you need. But, and here's the really key thing, you don't need fresh water for it, right? You can use gray water. No one's drinking this, so you can use non-potable water, whatever you need. So yeah, that growth can be supported using non-fresh water sources. So that's the first piece. The second question had to do with induced seismicity. And one of the really fantastic things is that Berkeley produced an induced seismicity protocol several years ago. that is labeled by the National Academies of Sciences as like the gold standard for this. And everyone who does any EGS, any enhanced geothermal systems work, any subsurface stimulation within the United States is following this protocol, which has really strict rules as to what you are looking for and how to avoid any concerns with induced seismicity. So I would also recommend people can take a look at that. This is just a momentary plug. If you have any questions with anything I'm asking today and you'd like to get a hold of me, please email at doe.geothermal@ee.doe.gov. That's doe.geothermal@ee.doe.gov, and we can continue conversation offline. So that's induced seismicity. And quickly on oil and gas, yes, we very much are looking to adapt oil and gas technologies, tools, and assets. So that includes both people and wells. There are differences between the environments. There are differences between the wells, and using abandoned wells is often problematic in a lot of ways, just because they aren't really in great shape when they're being transitioned to geothermal. But that is an active area of research and development right now.
Thank you so much. That was a lot in a short amount of time, and I think you covered some great information. We have a question for Cappy. So much is focused on heating, right? We talked about space heating, water heating. Well, actually, we talked about water heating as well, but let's talk also about cooling. What is the role of geothermal heat pumps in cooling? And you talked about how they work in reverse. And then I actually have a question of my own. How do deployment of geothermal heat pumps support grid resilience or lower demand for energy on the grid?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true that geothermal heat pumps do both heating and cooling. And we see actually from our customers, homeowners, one of the reasons that they adopt geothermal is because more and more homeowners in climates that haven't traditionally needed air conditioning realize that now they need it. And so, one of the benefits is if you have to put in central air conditioning anyway, or you want to, why not just get a heat pump and then you can heat and cool with the same piece of equipment. You don't need dual systems, air conditioner, separate furnace. And of course, geothermal has the benefit of being the most efficient possible way to heat and cool a house or a building. So that is the role that it can play for cooling. It also brings down that peak demand like it does in the winter. It brings down the summer peak. So it's very useful in that respect as well. For the second question, remind me of the second question. Sorry.
It was household resilience. So I have a good, so like an anecdote. So when the Texas freeze occurred last year, there's a community called Whisper Valley that has the entire community is with geothermal heat pumps. And they actually were able to maintain heating for the majority of the time in their homes using those heat pumps because they required less electricity. Mm-hmm. In your mind, the greater deployment of these systems, how do you see that impacting household resilience and larger demand issues or grid resilience issues?
Yeah, it's a good example of Whisper Valley and the deep Texas freeze. I mean, I think a lot of grid instability is caused by these peak events, right? In that case, it was a winter event. In many cases, it's in the summer. So when you deploy geothermal, you reduce that peak. So you're less likely to have these periods of extreme demand on the grid that often cause those periods of instability. So yeah, that's like a great example actually to bring up of one of the ways that there's a tremendous benefit to the system as a whole.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to quickly answer a question from Mark Zation here asking if utilities have a role in geothermal. And I will just answer for the heating and cooling side. Definitely yes. If you look at any of the utility filings coming out, a lot of them are investing in subsidy programs, rebate programs, and Eversource in Boston and Massachusetts is looking at an innovative pilot program to reconfigure some of the gas pipelines for geothermal district heating. So it's something that's very exciting going forward. Now, with 1 minute left, I want to do a very quick, and I mean quick, round robin lightning round of what you hope to see for geothermal in the next 10 years. Where do you see it happening in your respective area? I'll start with Sue.
I mean, what we are aiming for, right, are these same numbers that I've been talking about. We want to get to at least 60 gigawatts of power production by 2050. We want to get to 28 million geothermal heat pumps and over 17,500 geothermal district heating systems in the United States. That's our goal. We're going to get there by 2050. So everyone should just hang on tight. We're going to get there.
We're with you. Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, I would just build on it with a little bit of a dreamer hue. I hope to leave 60 gigawatts of utility scale electricity production in the dust. And I hope that, geothermal heat pumps are a household name and that every college campus is powered by deep direct use geothermal.
Great. I think we can do it. Kathy.
Within 10 years, everyone will know somebody who has a geothermal heat pump in their house, and people who are getting new heating or cooling equipment will be making a decision between whether air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps make more sense to them. I also think for new builds, mostly it will be geothermal.
Love that. Thank you so much. Teresa.
Well, I hope that West Virginia University and Cornell University are advertising to incoming freshmen that they are entirely geothermally heated.
Great marketing. That's great. And last but not least, Jack.
Yeah, for us at Arena, we are looking at increasing or supporting the increase of the installed heating capacity for geothermal to 3 times of what it was in the year 2015. That makes it at least 210 gigawatts thermal of heat. And we are working on this at Arena, also together with our partners from the International Geothermal Association. So my hope is that we can be able to meet this by the year 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So unfortunately, today our time has come to a close. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for such an incredible conversation. And thank you to all of our panelists for their time and their insight. Should any of you be interested in learning more, and I hope you are, I encourage you to check out the newly released report found both here in the chat and our Zoom, as well as on the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center website. You can also reach out to me. I authored the reports. I'm happy to chat with you about any of the content. Feel free to share the report far and wide with your colleagues and your friends. I'd like to thank everyone who was involved in making this event possible today, including Amaya Haddab, Juan Gomez, Zainab Ridonian, and Michael Matir. If you'd like to rewatch this event, a cache replay will be available on the Atlantic Council Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and we encourage you to share with your colleagues and your friends. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend, and until next time, and happy spring.